Mr. Aldous Huxley.
Brave New World is a fantastic parable about the dehumanization of human beings. Science, technology, social organization, they have become his masters.
There are people out there who still don't realize that fines are involved in this. And not just for businesses, but for people. Personal fines. If you don't sign up, if you don't get insured. They're forcing you into this system. Here's how it's going to work. If you don't sign up for this, at first it's going to be low. In 2014, it'll be 1% of your annual income. So $20,000 a year means a $200 bill for you. If you have kids, it's $47.50 per child with a cap of $285 there. However, by 2016, the fine is estimated to reach $695 a person, or 2.5% of your annual income. No, you paid that, and then you're still buying the insurance also. So the Supreme Court says it's constitutional because it's a tax, but it's actually a penalty. Semantically, they obviously don't even know, just like they didn't even know how to make a freaking website for more money than most of us will ever see in our lifetimes. It's insane. And we're supposed to trust them with our health insurance and our personal information going into their website, which apparently can be shared with law enforcement and all kinds of other agencies and the IRS. But how this turns into socialism, back in August, Senator Harry Reid, he was asked, do you think ObamaCare is secretly a step towards a single-payer healthcare system? And his answer wasn't just yes. Wasn't just absolutely. His answer was yes, yes, absolutely yes. He was just gleeful like a little child on Christmas morning or something. They've been trying to get this passed for decades now, and they've never been able to do it. So instead, they're going to incrementally do it just like they incrementally do everything else and start here. It means the government will control the one and only funding mechanism for healthcare. And when that happens, they can start to control so much more than just your health. Our government's not a government. It's basically a front for corporations. It's not even socialism. It's like Aaron said, it's oligarchical collectivism.
Pretty much everyone's familiar with George Orwell's 1984. If you're younger or if you just never got around to reading it, it's an important read, and I think it's a easy and interesting read too.
It's an instructional manual.
It's it's about the rise of totalitarian society. It's often been compared to Brave New World, the Aldous Huxley book. Now, both of these guys were in, or at least around, a group known as the Fabian Socialists, who were actually run at their core by the Fabian Society, who were part of a secret society, which incidentally was a spinoff from the Cecil Rhodes Roundtable groups, which spurned the Council on Foreign Relations, in the UK, the Royal International Affairs Council, their counterparts that are in Australia, Canada, different parts of Europe, etc. At the core, the Cecil Rhodes Secret Society Foundation was Cecil Rhodes, who was every bit the colonialist, and he, along with Rothschild, who was bankrolling him, wanted world government based on, for lack of better terms, Anglo-American domination. And they wanted to put a friendly face on it. They wanted individual countries to feel like they were the ones driving their progress and their destinies, when in fact it was being run by bankers. It was being run by an elitist oligopoly, mainly Anglo and other powerful people dominated aspects of society.
You don't say.
So that kind of brings us up to the past couple hundred years in general. The 20th century was not an era of capitalism, if it ever did exist. Perhaps it did during periods of the Industrial Revolution. What I see having happened during the Industrial Revolution, which began kind of in the era of the Founding Fathers, came to a head in the late 1800s, led directly to highly centralized production firms. Real cog in the wheel mentality is that a few businesses, a few monopolies, a few bankers, a few money men took control of all the great ideas that came out in the Industrial Revolutions, the new processes of making things, the new way of making things, and eventually the new way of marketing things so that everyone would have them. And they took domination of all that. And ever since, we've been living in a giant machine run by corporations, for the oligopoly, for the few who own basically almost everything. But we've been sold on the idea that we have a stake in this, that this is going to advance us personally, that it's going to advance society, that it's progress. You know that idea of progressivism on the Woodrow Wilson, Fabian Society, progressivism angle of socialism. It's a belief in socialism and getting everyone under a big collectivist tent because it's supposedly going to advance and progress society. Now, the Fabian Socialists, their most famous members were a bunch of famous writers. Like I said, Aldous Huxley, George Orwell. H.G. Wells was a really big Fabian Socialist. George Bernard Shaw, the playwright whose most famous play was Pygmalion, which became My Fair Lady. He was one of the founding members.
I've got his quote for you, too, in minutes.
There's a competition for ideas that became dominated by the Fabian Socialists who latched onto the scientific ideas of Darwinism, which are related groups of people, related groups of power, direct descendants of the crown and of the British oligarchy and of the larger Anglo-American establishment that set upon itself to rule the world and convince everyone it was for their own good. And there's obviously quite a bit more detail to that history. But on the back of what we know as Darwinism, of what we know as origin of the species, of what we know as survival of the fittest, as a driving mentality for society, as an idea that's supposed to move us forward and progress us, that science has the answer, was kind of in a yin and yang fashion. There was that recognition of supposedly what was going on in nature and science, and on the backs of it, how the oligarchy, how those in power, how the better people were going to use science to progress society. They knew better. They could now use science to make judgments about many things, about how to best efficiently run society, about which kinds of people were best to be in society, about who was best fit to breed, and this became the philosophy that you may have heard of called eugenics.
Are you just reading the mission statement of bioethics.gov? Because I thought...
Don't spoil my story here. So, Charles Darwin, household name for obvious reasons. Not a household name, his first cousin, Sir Francis Galton. He is the originator of eugenics, this idea that it's a very social Darwinistic idea that through science we can use our knowledge of heredity and other scientific factors to promote better people, to select better people, to select who is most fit to breed in the social strata, to eliminate those who are socially undesirable, who are socially unfit, who are physically unfit, who are genetically unfit, right? And behind both of these figures, cousins Charles Darwin and Sir Francis Galton, again of eugenics, is a man named T.H. Huxley, Thomas Henry Huxley. He's the grandfather of that Fabian Socialist, that famous author of Brave New World, Aldous Huxley. He's behind this whole modern cult of science knows best, of here we are with science. Why? Well, because he was president of the Royal Society of Science, known just really as Royal Society, that dates back hundreds of years, has very well-known and important and uniquely contributing people like Isaac Newton.
I think it's interesting how you're not supposed to argue with Darwin.
If you believe, people believe in science, but they don't believe in religion because of what science reveals, right? That's the whole heart of this religious scientific debate. Well, if you're going to believe in anything about science, you should believe in the scientific process of investigating based on what are supposed to be, what should be sound principles, which if they're not sound can be improved upon and become more sound. The whole idea is investigating reality, not accepting what other people say is reality.
And if you want to believe in science now, just believe that most of it's funded by the government or Bill Gates.
Yeah, what you know as science today is so incredibly funded and biased, it constitutes its own pseudo-religion.
It basically is.
Now, I'm trying to get back to the point of why this is important to socialism, but it's just full of caveats. It's just full of caveats. But this guy, Thomas Henry Huxley, was an important, if not altogether famous man. Again, he's the grandfather of Aldous Huxley, the famous author of Brave New World, a book you might have been made to read in high school. A lot of people were, along with 1984. But did you ever hear about how they were both Fabian Socialists or in and around them, or that H.G. Wells was? Well, H.G. Wells was an acolyte chosen by Thomas Henry Huxley, educated in science and, through one form of fortune or another, launched into his famous role as a science fiction author who wrote in fiction about science many things that would later become science fact, realities about our socialist progressive society, about the technocratic future. In fact, I'm trying to point out that the type of science we're talking about, the type of socialism we're talking about, the type of technology we're talking about is based on rule by technology, technocracy. It's about a socialist progressive society that uses science to make calculations and judgments about what is the best direction for science, okay? This is really important. And this guy, Thomas Henry Huxley, was the president of the Royal Society of Science, which accepted scientific papers, which acknowledged which papers were valuable, which promoted which scientific discoveries and papers were powerful and important enough to get out into the rest of society. Now, when his friend Darwin latched on to some other things that had already been discussed and observed and published Origin of Species, and after Russell Alfred Wallace, I would mention as an aside, Thomas Henry Huxley became what was coined Darwin's bulldog. You can look this up. It's on Wikipedia. It's well known. He was the main promoter of Darwin's theories. Darwin himself was from a somewhat powerful family that was married into more powerful parts of different families. And Huxley's family was wealthier and more tied to the original aristocratic line, although both had aristocratic blood. And Huxley promoted Darwin's theories on purpose because of his animosity towards religion, because he personally wanted to create a schism between religion and science, which are not necessarily compatible. I realize we could debate about this not only all day, but endlessly for years and years and years to come, centuries. I'm just saying science and religion are not necessarily incompatible. I'm not trying to bust anyone's belief system, but I'm saying this guy had an axe to grind because he was agnostic or occultist or various things that were not mainstream Christianity, and he saw in science a weapon to create new avenues in society. He was the promoter of the monkey scopes trial that argued for the entry of evolution into the classroom, and how this business about us not coming from monkeys was such a bunch of ridicule, and that these fundamentalists were ignoring these new facts about science and these new understandings. And I'm not at all saying there's not new understandings from science. I'm not at all saying there's not incredibly important stuff in genetics. I'm just saying that this certain niche of people in the Royal Society who, oh, by the way, while they were at the Royal Society of Science, which had so much power, were also part of a secret society called the X Club that was run by Thomas Henry Huxley and 9 powerful friends who ran the Royal Society for several decades, who decided to promote Darwin for their own agenda. As simple as that. You can look it up. It ties into a lot concerning the debates over the introduction of the theory of evolution to society, the way it was adopted, and the consequences since that time. Okay? I'm not saying there's no validity to that theory, and I'm certainly not saying there's no validity to religion. I'm saying you've been duped into a wedge position, and hasn't it created a schism in society? And what could they possibly want from that schism? Why would they possibly want a schism in society based on religion and science? Could it be for the reason that I'm talking about, so they could tell you what are the important things in science, so they could direct society and the increasingly collective society around the conclusions found from science? That's one thing I'm saying. And they also believed in that Huxley family that that schism between religion and science could lead to a third way, a world government, a world society based on rule by experts, by scientists, based on rule by technology, a technocracy over the planet. And
a new world order?
Oh my gosh.
No way.
And parallel to this,
I am shocked.
Splintered from this, were the Fabian Socialists. They were founded in 1883, late 1883, acknowledged though as 1884, which would be conveniently a full century before 1984, the book by George Orwell, which warned about, well, a totalitarian society for sure, but warned about deep in the pages of that book theory and practice of oligarchical collectivism. That was the outlawed banned book by the fictional character Emmanuel Goldstein, who was one of the original founders and originators of that 1984 Big Brother Society, who defected against it and became public enemy number one, who became the Bin Laden of the 1984 Society, who wrote a damning book, which again was banned, but some people, for the purpose of that book, got a hold of it, about the theory and practice oligarchical collectivism. Now, if you can put two and two together, if you understand the meaning of those words, begin to think about the implications of those words for your life. Are they running socialism for the benefit of everyone, for the greater good, or are they running socialism, which, like fascism, like Nazism, like the FDR society, is a type of collectivism, but run for who? For the benefit of who? For
a few.
Is that the definition of oligarchy? A few? Yes, that means rule by a few. And collectivism pretty much means the many. That's the everybody. Whoever they can get in that giant net, whoever's no longer allowed to be free.
The sheeple.
They're going to run the many for the benefit of the few. Oligarchical collectivism. In fact, it's so important. And that is what the Fabian Socialists are about. They are elitists. They believe in eugenics, which was coincidentally also founded in 1883. And here is what George Bernard Shaw, again, was a famous playwright, and he was one of the founding members of the Fabian Socialists.
People who only know me from reading my books, or sometimes even from seeing my plays, get a most unpleasant impression of.
This is what he said. This is a quote. Under socialism, you would not be allowed to be poor. You would be forcibly fed, clothed, lodged, taught, and employed whether you liked it or not. If it were discovered that you had not character and industry enough to be worth all of this trouble, you might possibly be executed in a kindly manner, but whilst you were permitted to live, you would have to live well. And what's living well? It's what they decide living well is. It's not what you decide.
The people who really meet me, they see that I am a most harmless person. I'm quite a kindly person, you know.
You must all know half a dozen people at least who are no use in this world, who are more trouble than they are worth. Just put him there and say, sir or madam, now will you be kind enough to justify your existence? If you can't justify your existence, if you're not pulling your weight in the social boat, if you're not producing as much as you consume, or perhaps a little more, then clearly we cannot use the big organization of our society for the purpose of keeping you alive, because your life does not benefit us, and it can't be of very much use to yourself.
You might possibly be executed in a kindly manner.
I'm quite a kindly person, you know.
And you would be forcibly, all those things, your life would be forcibly managed. Oh, they're going to take care of everything. They know what's best for you. They know what medications are best. They know what kind of housing you need to live in.
They know what kind of Common Core your kids need to be educated in.
Are we living through forced healthcare right now? Are there other aspects of society that will become forced in the near future, or that are already partially forced? Are we moving from a situation where a few companies dominate our choices on the so-called free market to a system where they're assigned to us, super collectivized market? And who does that benefit? Does forced healthcare stop benefiting the few companies who run the healthcare industry? Does it stop benefiting the companies who already profit handsomely off the vaccine industry or the pharmaceutical industry, or fill in the blank? Fill in the blank.